Hello everyone, in today's video I'll be showing you how to create this beautiful, whimsical deer in Procreate. We'll paint together and I'll guide you by sharing my favorite techniques to bring this beautiful deer to life. Whether you're just starting out your artistic journey or any advanced skilled artist, these skills will help you take your work to the next level. So take a moment, cozy up, grab a blanket, pour yourself a cup of tea, and let's get started. All the brushes and the canvases I'm using will be found in the description below. You can also download the free sketch and color palette there. And for today's demonstration, I'll be using the Rough Groove canvas, but you can use any canvas you like. And as you can see, I have already imported the sketch at the bottom of the watercolor canvas texture effect. And all of our paintings are going to be underneath that sketch. So we're going to create a new layer and drag it down to the bottom layer here. This is the same color palette that will be available for you, which I have created, and we'll be going through it in the same order. So we'll start with an orange tone color and make sure we're on that layer that we just created. And we're going to start with the wet on dry brush hard edge, keeping the opacity and the size at 100%, and we'll get started. We'll start from the top and work our way down. I wanted to try something different, starting with the darker tones to the mid-tones and then light tones. So we'll start from the top of the deer with a darker pigment on the top. Carefully drawing around the flowers. And we're going to darken the colors of the ears in the back, just like this. And I'm assuming the light is coming from the left side. We're going to keep it a little bit darker on the right side. So the neck is going to be slightly darker. And as well as the back of the deer. Because it's going to be a little bit on its side, you can see a little bit of the back. Now we're going to create a new layer and we're going to pick this light orange tone, which is going to be our mid-tone. And we're just going to put it underneath the areas where we painted before. And we're going to put some mid-tone colors underneath the eyes as well. Now moving on to the neck area, providing a nice transition from the dark to mid to the light tones. And we're going to put it on the left side as well. Now we're going to create a new layer. And we're going to pick this light grayish orange tone. And we're just going to paint it around the face, just like this. I was inspired to paint this deer because I see them in our yard all the time in the morning. And each time I see them, I have this feeling of magical moment, especially in the morning when the sun rises, a graceful presence inspired to capture that feeling of this painting. Although I don't usually see them with a bunch of flowers on their head, I think it makes it look magical, and it also gives me a chance to practice soft pastel colors, aiming for that gentle, dreamy look. And we're going to paint the neck with the light tone color now. Now once we're done that, we're going to add a darker black tone on the nose area. We're going to pick this black tone color and keep the opacity to around 30 to 35%. And we're just going to paint the top of it like this. Now we're going to paint the facial features of the deer. So we're going to pick the fine line brush now, and we're going to keep the opacity to around 40%. And we're going to draw around the areas like this, following along the sketch. We can reduce the opacity to around 15% and just fill in the small areas of the nose, keeping them slightly lighter. Now returning back to the 40% opacity, we're going to paint on top of this, giving it a bit more of a three-dimensional look, leaving the top a little bit lighter. Now moving on to the eye, we're going to keep the opacity to around 45% and we're going to paint around the lines like this, just like we did with the nose. And we're going to add some of the flares on the top, leaving some of the light reflection on the top. And again, we're going to add some more depth and realism by increasing the opacity to around 40 to 50% and just paint inside the eyes, leaving a little bit of the lighter tones in the bottom. This simple technique brings life to the eyes and fairly easy to do. And we'll do the same thing to the other eye, keeping the opacity to around 45%. Leaving a small circle on the top, a nice light reflection, with a little bit of flicks to create the eyelashes of the deer. Again, increase the opacity to around 55%, and we're going to paint inside the eyes again, overlaying the top, but leaving some of the bottom pieces lighter, just like this. And let's not forget about the mouth. We're just going to paint on top of the sketches, but we're going to leave some of the areas with some lines that are broken. This will give a bit more realistic look rather than a cartoonish look that we're not going for today. Now we'll focus on painting the ears of the deer. So we're going to create a new layer and we're going to pick this light grayish red-orange tone and use the wet on dry brush, keeping the opacity at 100% with the size 100% as well. And we're just going to paint along the lines like this, leaving the center alone. And we'll do the same thing with this side of the ear as well. Drawing the lines, following the sketch, leaving the center alone. And then we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to use this light red-orange tone and fill in the center like this. Same thing with the other side. And don't need to worry, we're going to blend them and mix in the colors. Now we're going to create another layer. And we're going to pick the grayish red-orange tone. That's a bit darker than the original ear color that we picked. This will create a bit more depth and realism to the ear. And we're just going to paint on the top and the bottom pieces of the ear like this, on the corners like that. Almost like the ears are folding in the insides, creating more depth. Now, it's time to start blending. So rather than combining all the layers together, to keep things organized, I'm going to combine the body layers, the face layers, and the ear layers separately by pinching them together using my 2 fingers. But we'll leave the dark area of the nose alone for now. So we should have 4 layers that we painted. So we're going to select that body layer that we had and pick the moving blender, and we're going to keep the size to around 30% when we're blending. And the trick here is to blend 2 tone colors at a time to avoid over smudging the area, wiggling around left and right, going in one direction, just like this. It does take some practice, but once you get it, you probably won't stop blending. Now move to the top so we can blend the face of the deer. The beauty of this blending process, it allows you to be creative and flow with the art. It's forgiving and it doesn't have to be perfect. And blend in some of that chic tone colors. Now for the nose, we're going to use the feathering brush. Make sure we have selected that nose tone color of the dark area And we're going to use the feathering brush to brush it out upwards as it naturally transitions from the darker fur to the lighter fur. Now we're going to select the layer that we have combined for the ear part, and we're going to use the moving blender again and giving it to around 30% size, and just go along the lines like this, giving a nice wiggle around the area. As you can see, it's very forgiving and doesn't have to be very accurate. It just blends. Now this is how your art should be looking like now after you have finished the blending process. Now let's start painting the flowers. So we'll use the rough hard edge brush, keeping the size to around 25 to 30% and 100% opacity. And we'll start with grayish red-orange tone. With the flowers, you can choose any color you like, different variations. So experiment with different colors and how they fit. And just paint around the petals like this. For the center flower, I picked pink. And the last one, I picked a cyan blue. For this, I mainly focused on pastel colors that are very light and not too vibrant, giving it that nice dreamy look. And for the center of the flowers, I'm going to pick a dark cherry tone color. And we're just going to layer on top of it to give a bit more depth. And we're going to pick this light green tone color now, and keeping the size to around 40%, and paint the leaves just like this. Adding green leaves to a painting like this helps balance the composition, enhancing the contrast, and makes the flower really stand out. It's almost like a natural frame, creating more depth, and the colors just pop in the center. And if you are enjoying these tutorials, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and you'll be notified when new videos are released. Now we're going to paint this strand of flower popping out with the same green, but use this yellow tone color to paint it on the flowers, just like this. Now we're going to create a new layer on top of the layer that we just painted. And to simplify it, what we're going to do is we're going to just add the darkened areas of the paint tone colors that I have added in the color palettes, by keeping the opacity to around 50% to create a bit more depth. So if I'm using the light pink tone color, it's going to be slightly darker, and we're going to add that. And since the light's coming from the left, it's going to be some shadows on the right side. Also the areas where their leaves or petals are going to be covering, overlapping each other like this. And don't overthink it. To simplify it, you can just simply add the darker tones to the center of the flower, which will naturally bring the viewer's eyes to that flower at the center. Now pick the green tone color, and we're going to add some more depth to the flowers and the leaves. Now I will show you how to add some small details like the fur without overcomplicating things. So we're going to go to the color palette and pick a darker tone color that ranges from a mid to dark tone color. So I picked this grayish red-orange tone. And I picked the fine line brush now, keeping the opacity to around 40% and 100% size. And we can zoom in and create some lines like this, flicking them, giving a natural look of fur without overcomplicating it. Simplicity is the key, and sometimes less is more. So you can just follow along, give some nice small flicks like this, which is easy to do and quite fun, while just adding some small details to enhance the painting. Now moving on to the neck area, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to put small lines, up to 3 to 4 lines like this, some long medium length like that. I'm going to start adding a little bit more darker values to make the illustration a bit realistic in a 3-dimensional look. Now we're going to create a new layer. So pick this brown tone color that we have here, and we're going to use the wet on dry brush, keeping the opacity to around 40%. And start from the top of the head of the deer that is naturally covered with the flowers to darken the area a little bit. And since the light's coming from the left, it's going to be a little bit darker on the right side. Because I wanted to keep this painting lighter to work with the color palettes, as you can see, it's generally lighter tones. But adding darker pigments can really give a nice statement, giving the lighter areas pop out even more. And to create more balance and a polished look, we're going to add some more darker tones in the center of the face too, and on the right side of the cheek, as it is covered from the light. Now moving from the neck, we're going to keep the opacity to around 45% and focusing on the right side. Since the light source is coming from the left, we're going to add some details. And also to the side of the deer, where it's showing a little bit of the back, it's going to be a little bit darker. And now we're going to blend a little bit of the tone colors by having that tone color selected and pick the moving blender. And we're going to keep the size to around 30%. And we're going to start blending them just like this. And as you can see, the lighter tones really pop out in the center of the deer's face and the neck as well, like this. And here's another trick I like to use to layer and create more contrast in the ears. Now we're going to create a new layer and pick this dark burgundy color, using the fine line brush, keeping the opacity to around 65% and focusing on the layers like this. Drawing on the lines as you can see the sketch, just paint around them. Focusing only on the top for now. And now we're going to use the feathering brush, keeping the size to around 15%, and we're going to drag out the pigments to the left side like this, on the left ear. The colors are very fluid, so we can shove back the colors to lighten the tone colors. Now once that's done, we're going to create a new layer now, and pick a white tone color and use the gouache brush. And now we're going to start painting the white spots on the deer's back. We'll keep the size to around 30% and 70% opacity level. And all we're going to do is focusing on the left here, just making some small dots like this. Some small, some bigger. Variation keeps it fun. Also on the right side a little bit there. And keeping the opacity to around 35% and lightening up the tone at the center. Just like this. We're going to lighten up the areas of the eyes and also the nose to give a nice shiny nose to the deer. Now I want to focus on creating some tall grass, almost like the deer is coming through the center. So create a new layer and pick this green tone color and pick the fine line brush, keeping the opacity to around 50% and size 100%. And we're just going to flare them out like this. And on the left, flaring it to the left side like that. Put some variation to the size and the length as well. And we're going to use the same tone colors that we used for the flowers on the top to create small lines like this. A little bit dots, kind of like flowers popping out. Just really enhances the color variations. And I went along adding the yellow tone colors, the blue tone colors, and the light pink tone colors. And I decided to add a nice background. So I created a layer underneath the layers that we had. All we have to do is drag the layer to the bottom. And I picked this very light tone color of pink and picked the wet on wet brush. And what I like to do is kind of like a ripped page working from the top and across to the left side, just like this. You'll barely see the painting, which is perfectly fine. Now from there, we're going to create a new layer on top of the layer that we just painted and click the clipping mask. Now you can have a lot of fun by adding some of the colors that we use for the flowers. The light, dark pink tone colors and the blue. Just painting on the outside, only showing a little bit of the wet on wet brush that we just used. Now go to your adjustments on the top left corner and click on Gaussian blur. Touch the screen while holding it, drag it to the right, and we're going to keep it around 16 to 20%. Now we're going to create another layer on the top to add some fun water splashes on top. So we're going to pick the Epic Splash, keeping the size to around 6%, and we're going to pick the same tone colors that we use for the flowers across the canvas. And to finish off this painting, we're going to create a new layer and pick this dark blue tone color and choose the wet on dry brush, keeping the opacity at around 30%. And creating some shadows like this. And since the light's coming from the top left, there's going to be some shadows underneath the flowers, just like this. A bit more shadows on the right side of the face as it is covered a bit. And of course on the right side of the chin. And the left side of the body. And now we're going to use the moving blender again to blend some of the more colors in of the shadows to make it a bit more smoother. And there you have it, beautiful whimsical deer created on your iPad. And if you enjoyed this tutorial and want to continue painting with me, click on the next video and I'll see you there.